Taken by the mists, the party find themselves in a lost valley. Dark powers press in against the light, and soon the master of Ravenloft will make a play for their very souls. Stick around as we try to break the Curse of Strahd. Hi everyone, I'm Gary. Let's get straight to it today. We're talking about something that I'm really enthusiastic about and I'm kind of really excited to do this video. We're going to talk about Curse of Strahd, which is, this video is the second part in a series. The first half, I was just kind of looking at Ravenloft as a setting and some of the kind of things that come out of AD&D and how Ravenloft as a setting kind of began and how it developed based on the original I6 module by Tracy and Laura Hickman. Today we're going to talk about Curse of Strahd, which is a module for 5e. This is going to be one of it's going to be more like my traditional videos in the sense that I am going to discuss an adventure in quite a lot of detail and talk about how I've run it successfully and a couple of things that you need to keep in mind if you're going to run it for yourself. Now, Curse of Strahd is widely considered and lauded as the best 5e module ever written. And you know what? I'm just going to come right out and say I agree. It is definitely the best thing that has been put out for 5e since its kind of arrival in 2014. You know, we can like indie press things, we can like small press modules, we can rage against the machine, but sometimes the machine produces something, you know, a dead clock is right twice a day, produces something that is pretty good. And this is 5e's core, you know, its corporate culture is producing something that's really wonderful here. And I'll explain why I think that is in a moment. Now, let's just get the basic stuff out of the way. It's 256 pages, so it's massive, right? As all 5e books are. And it was first published in 2016 with, if you look at the credits, the whole design team, the whole WotC kind of D&D team is credited. Chris Perkins is listed as the lead designer, but it specifically calls out its heritage as a descendant of the original I6 module Ravenloft by Tracy and Laura Hickman. As I said, I talked about this a lot already in quite a bit of detail in the first deep dive video on Ravenloft. If you click in the top right now, you see my video on that there. Now, the book marks a kind of noticeable trend in 5e material that was reimagining classic kind of AD&D modules, expanding them. So you get Curse of Strahd, which is based on I6 Ravenloft. You get Storm King's Thunder, which is based on the Gygaxian super module against the Giants. And you also get Tomb of Annihilation, which I think is another really good kind of entry into the 5e lineup and the kind of lineup of modern adventures generally, which is obviously based on an expansion of Gygax's Tomb of Horrors. Now, my bona fides before we get going, I have run this 4 times, and I am currently in the process of running it a 5th time. So I've run this module pretty much every other year since it came out, and I am like, man, every single time I run it, I notice new stuff. I think it gets better each time I run it, which is not the case. Most modules I run them either once or twice. Once if they're okay, twice I'm like, okay, that was pretty good, we can run that again. For me to run an adventure more than twice, it has to be pretty kind of platinum tier. And there's very few modules that kind of cut that. Winter's Daughter by Gavin Norman. That was the first ever module I talked about on this channel. That's a really good example of the kind of thing that I'm willing to run time after time. The thing about Curse of Strahd is that it's long. It's a whole campaign. It's not a modular adventure at all. So I've run it 4 times. I'm currently in the 5th time. 3 times I ran it. 3 times I ran it for 5e with kind of medium level parties. Once I ran it with Beckme, Basic Expert Companion Master Immortal, using the Rule Cyclopedia, which is this book just here. And I ran that for a party of about 10, maybe slightly more, maybe 10 or 11. And that worked brilliantly. And I'm currently running it for my own system, Journeyman Expert Master. I'm running it for a party of 4. And it is their 2nd campaign with these characters. They have played the 2nd edition campaign, Night Below, which I'm also in the process of reviewing and talking about. I am, as I said, I'm currently running it. I'm doing a campaign log of my current playthrough. If you click at the top right now, you can see the first episode of that. You might find some interest there. And that's just me talking through my current experience, what my party are doing. For once, I actually feel qualified to talk about something because I do know this module inside out. I could pretty much run it without the book now, which is a really kind of great sense of mastery to put yourself in as a game master, to kind of know the material really, really well. So we're going to talk about what happens in it, what I really like about it, why I think it's so good, and I'm going to talk about that for quite a long time. And then a couple of things that I would change, or a couple of sort of pitfalls in the writing and the formatting and the construction of the adventure that I think you just need to be a little bit aware of. So let's start with the through line, right? What is the main story of this campaign? And what the thing is that there's only really an inciting incident and an obvious kind of climactic conclusion, and there's lots of things that may or may not happen in the middle. It's one of its strengths, actually. So at the start of the adventure, the players find themselves in this mist-shrouded valley called Barovia. It doesn't matter how they get there, but they are transported from whichever setting they're in, and they are brought here to Barovia. That's great because it means you can place it in your own world, or you can drag them to Barovia. The book provides a couple of different hooks for bringing them to Barovia. I just like the simplest one, which is they're just like taken by the mist. So they just wake up in this kind of like misty hillside. And because I think that is the simplest and it gets things going quite quickly. And they're like, oh, what's going on? Why are we here? The party then enter the nearby village of Barovia. I think it's a little bit confusing that the village is like the village of Barovia, but there's other villages in the valley, which is also called the Valley of Barovia. But anyway, they enter the village of Barovia, which is a kind of dark place full of despair and kind of a deep, brooding gothicism. And that's overlooked by the sinister Castle Ravenloft, which is the haunt of the vampire lord Strahd. It's kind of like, and it's very reminiscent of Dracula. And what the party discover when they enter Barovia, there's a couple of different things that they learn. So there's a ghostly procession that leaves the village of Barovia each night, leaves the graveyard, and and heads its way up to the castle. And this is all the people, a ghost of all the people who have tried to defeat Strahd over the many centuries and failed. I'm just like, man, that is such good world building and such good kind of like foreshadowing, and it sets the tone because the players are like, oh wow, we're just like a long line. We're just going to be like one in a long line of failures, right? And then what the party also learned, the actual inciting incident is the thing that kicks off the actual narrative is they learn that the mansion, the burgomaster of the village of Barovia, he's recently died. And he has died defending his home from the Devil Strahd, from the vampire lord Strahd, who has been trying to break into his home, aided by the forces of darkness, ghouls and other undead creatures, because Strahd has become obsessed with the burgomaster's daughter, Irina Colliana. And he believes that Irina is the reincarnation of his true love, Tatiana. And what happens in the party is usually approached by Irina's brother, Ismark, who says, my dad's recently died. He kind of heart couldn't take the stress of constantly having to kind of like battle the Devil Strahd, keep him out of our home. I need you to help me and Irina take my sister away from the shadow of the castle westwards, hopefully to either the fortified kind of town of Valaki, or even further west, further from the castle to the Abbey of St. Markovia in the village of Kresk. And Kresk is surrounded by a stone wall, so there's that kind of protection there. So the party obviously kind of like, they got to agree. Part of the unwritten kind of contract, they agree to help Irina travel west, away from the shadow of the castle, away from the kind of imminent threat of Strahd. Now, while travelling through this kind of benighted valley, the party encounter the Vastani, and the Vastani are quite an important kind of trope element of the Ravenloft setting. The Vastani are travelling folk, obviously inspired by kind of like Romani or Sinti kind of travellers, and one of them is a fortune teller called Madame Eva, and she's a seeress, a kind of soothsayer. She gives them a card reading. It's called a Taroka reading. It's a play on the tarot. It's play on a kind of like a fictionalized like tarot deck. But what's interesting about this is that in this tarot reading, she gives the party several cryptic clues about the nature of this place. The first one is that Strahd is coming for them. Okay, nice and obvious. Then she gives them the location, the cryptic clue, leading them to 3 possible items that will help them battle Strahd. There is the Tome of Strahd, the holy symbol of Ravenkind, and the Sun Sword. So 3 very different items that can help them battle Strahd. They also get the hint that it's hinted at someone who will help them in the valley. So this is really interesting because it can be kind of like a generic vampire hunter, a kind of Van Helsing type character. It can be a kind of mechanical man that lives within the castle. It can be many different people. It can be a were-raven. Lots of different people might help them, but it points in the direction of an ally that is willing to come with them to face Strahd. And the last part of the reading is where their final encounter will be with Strahd. And I just love this because, okay, I mean, yeah, it's just like, ludicrously, it's engaging, right? And because what it actually is you use a set of playing cards to do this, and it's randomized. And this is taken from the original I6 of Ravenloft, the original version of this module. and it just works every single time. It's part of the reason why I can keep coming back to it, because each time I run this, what the party have to do is slightly different each time. Sometimes very different, right? The first playthrough I did, the location of every single item is completely different to the current playthrough that I'm doing. So that's really, really good fun. So the party take Irina further west. Hopefully they drop her off somewhere, and there's a kind of resolution to that story that can happen where basically she becomes aware of the fact that she does actually have the soul of Tatiana, as she is a reincarnation of this person who actually was in love with Strahd's brother, who Strahd murdered, Sergei. And there's the opportunity for their spirits to kind of be reunited. But how that happens is very different depending on when and where it happens. Ultimately, the party are going to have to explore the Valley of Barovia and gather these items, as many as they can, before Strahd closes in with his minions. And then they're going to face Strahd, and they are going to, become vampire slayers, or they're probably going to die in the attempt, right? And it's just wonderful. So what do I like about this? Why do I hold this module in such high regard? Because one thing I want to communicate in this video is my extreme passion and enthusiasm for this module, because I don't think this is the majority of 5e content. I don't think this is the majority of really modern kind of overproduced kind of adventures, but I do think that this is wonderful, and I would be, to say otherwise would be me being contrarian for the sake of it. So what do I like? Well, there's loads of adventure locations in this valley. It provides a perfect yam-shaped structure. I've talked about yam-shaped adventure structure before. Click in the top right, you can see my video on yam-shaped adventure structure. But this provides that perfectly. What that is a focus start, the broadening out to allow the characters to explore a sandbox, and then a very focused end. The adventure locations are varied and interesting. So there is, for example, I'm going to run through a few. There is Yester's Hill, which is a kind of druidic hillside. So it's a kind of an Ogham hillside where a group of evil druids have erected a wicker man, which they are kind of going to kind of try and animate into an evil kind of like treant. And it's like, wow, that's cool. And there's also there, what they kind of cultivate and worship is a Gulthias tree, which is basically a vampire that has been staked to the ground and had a tree grow from them. It first appears, I believe, someone can correct me in the comments if I'm wrong, but it first appeared, a Gulthias tree first appeared in the Sunless Citadel, which is a 3rd edition module, and it is used beautifully here. There is the Amber Temple, which is a kind of mad wizard's lair, and I love the Amber Temple as a dungeon. It's a very, I don't want to say generic dungeon, but it feels like a dungeon. It's an underground area full of passageways and secret doors. And there's a series of undead creatures there, but there's also a series of barbarians there that have kind of taken shelter from the weather there. So you've got a bit of factional play. There's this one, man, there's just a great encounter in the Amber Temple where there's a well. And if the party look down into it, there's a pair of flame skulls, these kind of like floating, spell-casting undead skulls. They begin to float up towards them. It's like these skulls can cast fireballs. It's like the party looking over and like, oh yeah, you can see the light, and this light's coming towards you, and it's getting bigger, and it's like, oh no, they realize, oh, it's too late, it's a fireball, and it explodes into this room like a parent. Just fantastic stuff. There is Old Bone Grinder, which is a windmill, which is inhabited by hags. And what they do is they grind up children's bones and make them into kind of confectionery. It's just like grim as anything, and just, oh man, I love it. There's Argenvostholt, which is a ruined mansion, which has a tragic knight who is searching for his lover, who has kind of died in died in tragic circumstances. That's wonderful. There is even a werewolf lair. All these werewolves are kind of like gathered children. They're going to eat them, right? Just grim and gothic and grisly and just fantastic. The thing that, that is wonderful, I'm going to talk about the last dungeon in a moment, but the last adventure site in a moment. But the one thing that I love about all of this is that I think it captures the Gothic truly. It's not just, it's not just a Gothic-themed amusement park in Fantasyland, right? It's not just the accoutrements of Gothicism. It is true Gothic. There is a sense of despair, a sense of tragedy. Ah, man, there's this bit in the village of Barovia at the beginning where if they go to the chapel, they see this kind of cream-faced priest is like fat and like, whispering prayers at the altar. And as the players approach down the kind of aisle, they can hear this kind of awful pain screaming coming from the undercroft, like, Father! And what it is the priest, his son, Doru, the priest is called Donovich, his son, Doru, was a knight who attempted to slay Strahd a few years ago, failed, was bitten by Strahd, turned into a vampire spawn, and his father was locked him in the basement of the Undercroft. And because he's a vampire, his father hasn't fed him, right? And he's starving. And it's just like, oh man, this is great. The last dungeon that is just wonderful is obviously it's Castle Ravenloft. It is the exact same dungeon presented in i6 and created by Tracy and Laura Hickman. And you get a wonderful version of the map that is the same kind of isometric view of Castle Ravenloft. It's fantastic. I have it on my wall as a poster, like in a frame. I just think it's great. And it's just updated and kind of colorized, but it's exactly the same map. Castle Ravenloft is fantastic. It's very reminiscent of Dracula, very reminiscent of something like Beauty and the Beast. These kind of like crumbling lintels and forgotten torture chambers and dungeons. And there's the Brides of Strahd. There is this in the tallest tower. There is a pulsing crystal heart that it's kind of a phylactery for Strahd. You kind of need to destroy that. There's so much stuff going on, and it's just absolutely brilliant. All of these locations are tied together in this kind of gothic despair and tragedy that surrounds Strahd, who is this fratricidal, obsessive vampire that is just, Strahd is the adventure, and he will always be this setting. The NPCs in the adventure are all largely compelling. Right? I can't really think of anywhere I'm like, oh, they're just rubbish and I'm never going to use them. Ismark and Irina are just good at the beginning of getting things going, but there are a number of other NPCs that are really compelling. For example, the abbot in the Abbey of St. Markovia. He's basically a fallen angel. He's one of those like D&D terms. He's like a Deva, D-E-V-A. He's basically a fallen angel. He's like an angel in the world, but his goodliness has been perverted and corrupted in the most gothic way. So what he's doing is he's like a flesh crafter, and he's attended on by all these kind of disgusting kind of like mongrel half kind of like creatures that are a blend of different things, and he thinks he's improving them by helping them, and they actually quite like it, but he's not. And what he's doing is he's making a sort of bride of Frankenstein because he knows that Strahd desperately wants Tatiana, and he's hoping that if he creates this kind of like this corpse-like bride, it might act as a kind of a suitable proxy for Tatiana. And it's just like great. It's just like obviously not going to work and just like so grim. There's Van Richten / Rictavio. There is a traveling bard the characters can meet called Rictavio. This is actually the vampire hunter Van Richten in disguise. So he's like your Van Helsing type character. And if you're aware of Ravenloft as a wider setting, you know that he's kind of Strahd's kind of arch nemesis, right? They have this kind of like they have this backstory that is entwined. And he's in Barovia. The characters can recruit him for help. That's wonderful. I mean, and I'll just say again, the best thing though, the best NPC, of course, is Strahd. He is present as a villain, and that is what is important. He turns up. He kind of like he attacks the players. He interacts with them. He is engaging. He has a backstory. He does everything in this module, which I believe Laura and Tracy Hickman wanted him to do when they conceived of him all those years ago in the early 80s for i6 Ravenloft. Now, what did I change about this? Or what do I change about this? And what concerns should a game master have? Like, what kind of like pitfalls might there be? Well, it's a 5e book, right? So it means that the prose is dense and there's not really much thought given to the layout, right? So the magic items are at the back in an appendix. The stat blocks are in the back in an appendix, but then like the descriptions of the rooms are at like the other end of the book, and they're like, right, this is a lot of flipping, right? I know that, to be honest with you, the way you solve that is you read the book. You read the book probably twice and just get a really good sense of what's going on. So it doesn't matter if you can't remember one particular detail at a moment. You probably already have it there stored in the end. And it is worth saying that this book is easier than a lot of 5e books to navigate. Why? Because it doesn't at any point list a series of like events or anything that you're trying to shoehorn the characters into. What it actually does is it just goes, here is Barovia. Here's every single location on the map is given a letter, and then the chapter headings are just the letter. So I think K is the one for Castle Ravenloft. If you turn to the chapter that all the rooms are like K, it's like K1 is like the entrance to Castle Ravenloft. K2 is like the dining room or whatever. And so it is organized kind of functionally. It's not unpleasant. It's just not as good as it could be. So I just make sure you read the whole thing before running it. The other thing is, I would make sure that Strahd is present, I would track Strahd, like where he is and what he's up to, because the module doesn't tell you to do this, but because we want to build a sense of verisimilitude, I'm not a narrativist. I'm a bit more of a kind of simulationist and a bit of a gamist. I like the idea that Strahd does exist where the players are not. So I like to track where he is when I'm running this in my Game Master notes. I also, one thing that the original Taroka reading did in I6 in 1983 that the Taroka reading doesn't do in Curse of Strahd is that it gave Strahd a particular goal that he's working towards. So it might be to kind of get a hold of Irina, but it might be to kind of work on some kind of Frankenstein's monster, or to, kind of cause a confluence of the mists or whatever. Like giving him different possible goals. And I think that might be a good idea to do for Game Masters, is have a list of goals that Strahd is working towards throughout the campaign and have him roll to see whether he's kind of succeeded on it or how close he is. I just think that is, again, it's about building up the sense that the world continues to exist when the players aren't looking at it, because that is engaging and interesting, and more important than that, it is meaningful. So you got to do that. So, give some consideration to what Strahd's intentions are, develop those intentions, track his whereabouts and what he's doing. The last thing, which is really minor, I always increase the scale of the map. And what I mean by that is the hex map is the hex is a 1/4 of a mile. It means that they can get from like one end of the valley to the other end in like a day. I don't like that. I like the idea of them having to consider where they're going to rest for the night, because being out in the wilderness in Barovia at night is like dangerous and frightening and must be avoided. So I actually increase the scale on the map to 1 hex equals 1 mile. And yeah, as long as you're just aware of that and you don't let it push out the kind of scale of like the actual locations, that doesn't matter. But it's just more for traveling. So I increase the scale of the map. Now, that is how I have successfully run Curse of Strahd 4 times. I am hoping that this 5th time will be just as successful, if not more so. I hope again that I have conveyed my enthusiasm for this module and that you have found something useful or engaging, or you've just enjoyed kind of sitting and listening for 10 minutes. But that is my deep dive on Ravenloft. I'll be back again next week, as ever. But until then, like and subscribe, comment, please. I'm really interested to know people's opinions on this sort of stuff. Do all that good stuff. I'm Gary, and I'll speak with you again soon. Thank you.